Hello everyone, my name is Matt Livesey and I'm a Land Management Biodiversity Advisor at JNCC. This presentation introduces the Joint Nature Conservation Committee, otherwise known as JNCC, and provides the background on why and how JNCC developed the pollution global analysis. We will then explain in detail the method used, which was based on information provided by the International Union for Conservation of Nature, otherwise known as IUCN. Examples of the outputs will be shared, and we will end the presentation by highlighting the limitations of the method. This video is the first out of a series of 3 videos created to support the delivery of a Reducing Pollution through Partnership project. Specifically, this video explains the methods used in the pollution global analysis that was carried out to determine areas where species are impacted by pollution. The second video presents the results of a pollution global analysis, and the third video uses the results from a global analysis and zooms in with details for each pilot country. JNCC is the public body that advises the UK government and devolved administrations in the United Kingdom on international nature conservation. Our people are dedicated to providing high quality scientific evidence and advice on the natural environment. The aim of this project is to scope and help to design a wider pollution programme to be delivered by the United Kingdom in low and mid-income countries. The programme is to enhance the ability of these countries to manage and to reduce air, chemical and waste pollution. Our priority is to engage early with pilot countries to understand how to better deliver a fit-for-purpose pollution programme in the future. JNCC was commissioned by the United Kingdom Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, otherwise known as DEFRA, to deliver a project scoping year. In June 2021, JNCC and DEFRA held a workshop with pollution experts to discuss what was the best way forward in starting discussions and designing a pollution programme. We looked at several options, from collating pollution evidence from databases, investigating the impact of trade, exploring environmental available models, and using the IUCN Red List to create heat maps on the impact of pollution on biodiversity. We pondered different aspects, from how widely applicable the evidence base was, what pollutants were already covered, what spatial and temporal resolution would be useful, and how readily available the information was as we were constrained by time. The general consensus from the workshop was to use all of the available information discussed during the workshop. Concerns were raised that using one single method in isolation would only tell part of the story. Because we have limited time and budget to complete the global analysis in this scoping year, we made the decision to move forward by developing the pollution global scale analysis using only the IUCN Red List. We all agree that such global analysis needed validation for a local sense check by gathering country information and ideas from existing local contacts. We thought that by following these steps, a reasonably comprehensive analysis could be produced in the timeframes we needed. It's worth noting that the global analysis is a starting point to initiate discussions with pilot countries and to get us to start thinking about the programme options. IUCN is a membership union composed of both government and civil society organisations. It harnesses the experience, resources and reach of its more than 1,400 member organisations and the input of more than 18,000 experts. This diversity and vast expertise make IUCN the global authority on the status of the natural world and the measures needed to safeguard it. The IUCN Red List of threatened species is the world's most comprehensive inventory of the global conservation status of plant and animal species. With its strong scientific base, the IUCN Red List is recognised as the most authoritative guide to the status of biological diversity. I will be talking through the methods we used as part of the global analysis, looking at the impact that pollution is having on biodiversity around the world. As the basis for this analysis, we use the data from the IUCN Red List of threatened species. This is a list of species assessed by extinction risks using the IUCN Red List categories and a set of criteria. The Red List includes all species which have been assessed and not only those species identified as being at high risk of extinction. As part of each assessment, the extinction risk of a species is identified. The extinction risk categories include critically endangered, endangered or vulnerable species, which are all in themselves considered threatened species. There are also the categories of near threatened and least concern. The assessment also includes the major threats to species, such as different forms of pollution. Also included in the database are information about the habitats that the species occur in and the countries in which they are located. The data can be used to determine what is impacting which species globally. The information is publicly available on the IUCN webpage and the data are available at request. This slide shows an example of a Red List assessment of a South Asian river dolphin. Each assessment has the scientific name of the species as well as the link to the assessment report. It also informs what the species status is. In this case, you can see in bold red that this species is assessed as endangered. Every assessment also includes the distribution map of the species. Here it's shown in orange, following the major rivers in its range, and it also includes the date that it was last assessed. In this larger map, you can see the shapes of the rivers in which the dolphin is found. Relating the species distribution with pollution information can determine what is impacting which species globally. IUCN has 6 main pollution categories and 13 subcategories. The IUCN database can be filtered by these different pollution categories. Relating this information to the species distribution allows the creation of heat maps by overlaying the ranges of multiple species impacted by the same category of pollution. For this analysis, we filtered all species to include only those which are assessed as threatened, which means they are critically endangered, endangered or vulnerable, and also those species which are assessed as near threatened. Near threatened species are the species that, if no conservation effort are applied, are under risk of becoming threatened. We then filtered those species to find any species where one of the pollution threats categories was also included as being a reason for the increased risk of extinction for that species. From this, we can use the data in 2 major ways. One is to summarise species counts at different polluting categories at the country level. So, for each country, we know how many species are at risk from that particular pollution threat. The table in the slide shows an image from the database. We can filter the database to extract the information for each country and for each pollution category. The table shows that Kenya, for example, has 206 total number of species threatened by pollution. We can also see that the pollution category with the highest number of species threatened for Indonesia is agriculture and forestry runoff, with 549 species impacted. The second way we can visualise the global impact of pollution on species is to use the species range maps to create heat maps highlighting where the pollution problem areas may be. Species range maps show areas where species can be found, for example rivers where the South Asia river dolphin inhabits. Heat maps shown in red the ranges of species which are the area in which species occur which are threatened, in this case by pollution. By overlaying the species range maps on top of each other, darker red colours appear. This is where there are multiple species in an area all listed as having the same pollution threat. This helps to identify the pollution problem areas and might help inform where to focus efforts to reduce pollution. The map shows hotspot of species impact by pollution throughout Europe, the Indo-Pacific, the Sub-Saharan region and the Mississippi gigantic watershed. The IUCN Red List is probably the most complete information on species globally, and certainly for providing information on species extinction risk. But we do want to point out some of the limitations associated with using the data. One main limitation is that the threat classifications which are included in the assessments are associated with the species and not with the threats themselves. Therefore, specific pollution threat areas are not clearly identified. The IUCN pollution classification data is describing the pollution effects of species in at least part of their range, but not necessarily throughout the whole range. Therefore, with particularly large ranging species, using the range maps may overestimate the presence of the threat. Also, for some species, it's worth considering that pollution is not the only threat causing decline to the species. In this example, we have a wandering albatross. On the map you can see it's got a large range as it covers most of the southern oceans. Its major threats include longline fishing and pollution from solid waste such as garbage. These are likely to threaten the species throughout its range, whereas another of its threats, invasive species for example, would actually only affect this species in its breeding colonies, which are restricted to a small area. So using the entire range map for that threat would not be appropriate. On the other hand, the maps can highlight many species impacted by the same threat. This is a reliable sign that this area is a problem for pollution. For example, this is one of the hundreds of cichlid species which are endemic to Lake Victoria. An endemic species is one that can only be found in one region. Some of the cichlids are only known to live in specific parts of the lake. Many of these species rely on visual cues for their breeding, and so they are threatened by the heavy levels of sedimentation. By overlaying all the species threatened by sedimentation in the map, we can actually see that Lake Victoria starts to stand out and show up as a real problem area. While the IUCN Red List is the most comprehensive database available, it does not include all species and range maps for sensitive species, which are not published. Therefore, all species counts presented in the global analysis should be considered a minimum estimate. Comprehensively assessed groups include amphibians, mammals, birds, conifers, sharks and rays, and reef corals. The global analysis results are biased to these groups, which are all best well represented. We need to have this issue in mind when thinking about the global analysis. It's worth considering that these are carried out as a global assessment, and therefore it may not be the best way of highlighting species of concern or pressures of concern, such as pollution, that will be a particular priority at the country level. The IUCN Red List update frequency means that results of this analysis are unlikely to change much over the short to medium term. It is therefore a powerful way of giving information at a point in time, but it is more difficult to determine changes over time. The global analysis results were obtained by overlaying range maps of threatened species by pollution and creating heat maps. The results can be broken down and shown by pollution type, species, and taxonomic group. More detailed information about the species and pollution can be found on the IUCN documentation. Overall, we believe this analysis provides powerful information on how pollution is impacting species around the world and may offer some insight to country level considerations along with other sources of information. Finally, we thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation, and if applicable, we wish you a useful workshop. We value your help and discussions on this project. We are also happy to answer any questions that you might have. Our contact details can be shown on the current slide.